why has Putin's regime, why have they invaded Ukraine? Number one is for regime change. They want to get rid of the Zelensky government. They want to, which is basically NATO aligned. You know, Zelensky, goes to the White House, meets with Biden, goes to Silicon Valley, meets with the big tech companies. You know, Apple CEO, he's sat there with Tim Cook. He's their guy, he's NATO's guy, basically. And fundamentally, Russia sees Ukraine, sees his government as basically meaning that Ukraine is within NATO. And for their own long-term strategic interests, you know, NATO is a hostile organisation as far as Russia's concerned. And they're basically encircling all of the western part of Russia, which is Eastern Europe. They're encircling it with military bases and, you know, all that type of stuff. And fundamentally, Putin wants a pro-Russian regime back in Ukraine that they had a few years ago, that after the whole Euromaidan thing, they've had pro-Western governments since then essentially. And so he wants to get rid of this, you know, American puppet, if you will. And I'm not in any way condoning this war, which is an illegal war of aggression, in my opinion. I don't think what Ukraine have done justifies, and what NATO have done even. Although NATO are one of the biggest threats to peace in this world because of America's global dominance, I don't agree that it therefore justifies Russia's invading of sovereign territory of another state. I don't agree, even though yes, they've bombed people in the Donbass, killed 14,000. They won't give autonomy and true separatism, and they're not to the Donbass region, you know, in Donetsk and Lugansk. Fundamentally, he sees Zelensky as a threat to his long-term strategic interests, and so because he doesn't want NATO on his doorstep in one of the most strategic regions of the world, and so he definitely doesn't want NATO, which of course America and NATO, well, depending on which country you ask, but America definitely doesn't want the Nord Stream 2 to go ahead. It definitely doesn't want that to go ahead, because that would bring, you know, the big pipeline system from Russia to Germany. It doesn't want that to go ahead, America, because it doesn't want us to be reliant upon and to have further economic engagement between Europe and Russia. And Putin definitely doesn't want Zelensky government in power. It's clear he's in Kiev now, and my feeling is that he'll be disposed of. I don't mean killed. I mean maybe he will be, but he'll be gone within a few days or week maybe. And what's going to happen next, I don't know. But fundamentally, he wants to get rid of the current government of Ukraine. That's fundamental. Number two, he wants to stop NATO's interests in Ukraine, and by taking out that government that he feels that supports it in many ways, that he feels gives him greater security on his doorstep. So by not having another Eastern European power fall to NATO, essentially, because Ukraine is on this membership plan thing to become, it's like some kind of enhanced partner thing, where eventually it will become a NATO partner. I believe in the constitution of Ukraine now, in the last government, they've amended it so that eventually full membership of NATO will be had. Those that is a breach of prior agreements that they made years ago when they said they wouldn't go past Eastern Germany. As soon as they could, they did. So that now loads of countries, from Lithuania to Romania are within NATO, and we have to question, why does NATO exist? We know why it exists. It exists to as a kind of bulldozer for Americans' global economic interests. Basically, that's what it is, and we need to fundamentally disband NATO. Now, that might not happen in my lifetime, but ultimately, we have to question, why does NATO exist now when the Soviet Union doesn't exist? Now, ultimately, the second major reason is to stop NATO's influence in Ukraine. The third reason is because they've been violating the Minsk agreements, the 2014-2015 agreement that was signed between Russia and Ukraine that said there was going to be a ceasefire, stop the bombing, and make Ukraine neutral, give the Donbass some political autonomy. Ultimately, these things have not happened. Give them elections and so forth. Ultimately, the Donbass, is a very poor region of Ukraine. Ukraine itself is a super poor country, and fundamentally, compared to its European counterparts, and fundamentally, the ethnic Russians, there's about 8 million ethnic Russian people within Ukraine. There's about 41 million Ukraine population total, and there's about 8.1 or something million Russians within Ukraine. They've not allowed the people of the Donbass region that are largely Russian, or a large minority are Russian, they've not allowed them to have any kind of political autonomy with elections and that type of thing. They've not allowed them, they're autocratically, Ukraine government has autocratically denied their ethnic beliefs in terms of wanting to speak the Russian language, at school and on government signs and stuff like that. They're basically, I don't know if I wouldn't call it a genocide, but it is a form of ethnic cleansing, really, what is going on by they're trying to attack the Russians that live there. They don't want them to separate. They don't want them to have independence. They want them to be within Ukraine. And him going in, whilst I don't accept at all, is to protect them only. There's some reason to do that. Definitely, I would say. Even though, again, I don't accept that he should do this, that Russia should invade to protect the ethnic Russians in eastern Ukraine. I don't accept that they should do that. There has to be a diplomatic. You don't wage all-out war. It's not like he's only going into the Donbass region. He's going to Kiev. He's taking out the air defences. He's doing a full-scale attack on Ukraine, and this can't be justified. I don't agree, and some on the left think that it can. I don't think it can be justified. I think it is still and ultimately an illegal war, and I don't support it at all. But so that's the third. That's another reason. Another reason is the fact that Putin has written that, and if you saw him in the speech the other week, if the translation was correct, he talks about, he's written last year that Belarus and Ukrainians and Russian people are one people, in his opinion. He calls them the triune the triune people with a shared ancestry and a shared destiny. He talks about how the Ukraine as an actual land area, it basically is Russian territory. He feels it. I mean, Ukraine was within the USSR for 70 years, since like 1920 till it broke up. I mean, I'm sure there's many cultural similarities between Ukrainians and Russians. Now, ask yourself, but so I think that ultimately he does feel as though Ukraine is really a part of Russia, or should be, and he probably does want some of it to be annexed and come under, at least if it's not fully annexed, he would want it to have a pro-Russian government and to have much closer economic and political ties, with him basically viewing that area of the world and the people as part of Russia, even if it's not legally and in practice. I'm sure many Ukrainians would not agree with that and would say, no, we're not the same people, and we don't want to be a part of this authoritarian Russian system that exists now. But that's another reason, you know, fundamentally, you know, Putin's not wrong in that he doesn't want NATO for his own security, for his own states on his borders, right on his borders. You know, just like America wouldn't want it if a Russian military alliance was right on the borders of Canada and right on the borders of Mexico. They would never want that. They would never accept that as well. And yet we expect Putin to accept NATO in Ukraine doing whatever it's doing, a hostile military alliance. And of course, he's not going to be happy, even if officially they're not yet a full member. Fundamentally, he's Biden's man. He's America's man. This guy, the guy who's in Zelensky, he is America's guy. He's NATO's guy, and so it's no wonder that they're going to feel a massive security threat by permitting that to happen. And so it is true that the continuous NATO expansion all across the east of Europe is a threat to Russia. It is a threat to Russia. And even though I don't believe at all he should be invading, I'm completely against this war. It is not right. It is not right to do a full-scale invasion of a sovereign territory when there are diplomatic solutions. I mean, merely honouring Minsk, the Minsk agreements would resolve a lot of the problem and keep Ukraine neutral and allow the Donbass region, if it wants to become independent, allow it to do that, allow it to have free elections, and get NATO completely out of Ukraine. But that has not happened. And to stop bombing them, stop this ridiculous ethnic cleansing of Russian people and that region of Ukraine is an absolute disgrace. I completely agree, it is an absolute disgrace. But fundamentally, we have to ask this question: how many people in Russia would support this war? How many ethnic Russians in Ukraine would support this war? How many Ukrainians would support this war? And I think the answer to all of them is very few. Only the most extreme pro-Russian, supporters would possibly support a full-scale invasion of another country. It is wrong. It is deeply wrong. And we condemned Iraq. We condemned America for its totally illegal invasion and occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan in the which is now nearly 20 years ago. In fact, it is 20 years ago. Iraq was 2003 and Afghanistan was October 2001, sorry. And fundamentally, whilst this is not the same, it can't be said to be the same because of all the things I've just said. It is still an illegal invasion, and we must, as socialists and communists and anarchists, we must condemn this war. This is not the answer. I accept he has some legitimate reasons for it, but I do not accept that an illegal war is the answer. What's going to happen now? Who knows? I don't believe that he wants all of the Eastern Europe to be submerged under the Russian influence again. I don't think he's going to invade Poland and that type of thing. But fundamentally, it has been pretty shocking. I mean, how easy Ukraine has fallen, basically, because it's only a matter of time now when they completely take over Kiev and everything. And so, ultimately, this is with the threat of global thermonuclear war. We cannot have a World War III where NATO powers are actively engaged in war with Russia, because it will end up, it only takes a false flag, it only takes a mistake, a misunderstanding to trigger a thermo-global nuclear war where the whole human race were all gone. I'm not saying that's going to happen now, but the further we enter into, the further NATO expands, threatening Russia, and triggering wars like this is and Putin's should never have invaded this country, Ukraine. But ultimately, the more this carries on, the more chance there is going to be of a global thermonuclear war, and it will be the end of everything. It really will, So we cannot have this now. There has to be a peace agreement in place, basically. It can only be done through diplomatic measures, not war.